late 1960s marked a point where American performance stopped being theoretical and became physically dangerous. Horsepower numbers climbed faster than tires could grip the road. Acceleration figures dropped into territory once reserved for race cars. Yet braking distances, suspension control, and safety equipment barely improved. Drivers were suddenly managing levels of speed their cars could achieve, but not safely control. By 1969, several production muscle cars could reach 60 miles per hour in under 6 seconds. Some could do it in under 5. That kind of acceleration, in an era of bias ply tires, drum brakes, and flexible chassis, created a problem nobody fully understood yet. Manufacturers knew the cars were fast. What they underestimated was how unforgiving they had become. In this video, we're examining 10 of the most dangerous muscle cars to come out of the 1960s. Not because they were poorly engineered, but because their performance numbers outpaced the technology meant to keep drivers alive. 1967 Pontiac Firebird. .400 Pontiac arrived late to the pony car war but brought serious firepower. The Firebird 400 stuffed a 6.6-liter V8 producing 325 horsepower and 410 pound-feet of torque into a chassis designed for smaller engines. At 3,300 pounds with bias ply tires, 0 to 60 came in 6.5 seconds with quarter-mile runs in the mid-14s. The F-body platform wasn't optimized for big block weight. The nose-heavy front caused severe understeer entering corners, lift-off mid-corner, and weight transferred rearward. The rear tires would break loose instantly. The steering was quick at 3 turns lock to lock but gave 0 feedback. Base models had 4-wheel drums. Even with optional front discs, fate arrived fast. 1968 Dodge Dart GTS 38.3. Dodge crammed big block fury into their compact Dart. The 383 cubic inch V8 delivered 330 horsepower and 425 pound-feet of torque in a car weighing just 3,200 pounds. 0 to 60 came in under 6 seconds with quarter miles in the low 14s. But the A-body platform was designed for 6-cylinder economy cars. The suspension had minimal travel. Shocks were undersized. Frame rails weren't reinforced for big block torque. Under hard acceleration, the entire body twisted, panel gaps changed, doors jammed, the structure flexed violently. The torsion bar front allowed dramatic nosedive under braking. The leaf spring rear with solid axle meant constant wheel hop. Launch hard and the axle wound up the springs. When tires broke loose, stored energy released violently. Steering was slow and vague. Brakes were marginal drums unless you paid extra for front discs. 1969 Ford Torino Cobra. Ford's midsize Warrior carried the 429 Cobra Jet V8, officially rated at 375 horsepower. Real output pushed 450 horses with over 500 pound-feet of torque. Quarter miles vanished in the low 13s with 60 arriving in under 6 seconds. At 3,800 pounds, this was heavy with serious momentum. The long hood compromised visibility, especially when the front lifted under acceleration. The body-on-frame chassis with solid rear axle and leaf springs prioritized comfort over precision. Body roll was dramatic in corners. Turned the wheel and the car leaned heavily before the front tires responded. The delay made precise inputs impossible. The rear suspension allowed severe axle wrap during hard launches. Leaf springs wound up as torque tried rotating the axle. When tires broke loose, springs unwound violently, causing wheel hop that could snap components. Front disc and rear drum brakes couldn't handle repeated stops from triple digits. 1967 Chevrolet Camaro SS 39.6. Chevrolet's pony car brought big block muscle. The 39.6 cubic inch V8 made 325 horsepower in standard form, but the L88 version pushed 375 horses. At 3,300 pounds, quarter miles came in the mid-13s with 60 arriving in under 6 seconds. The unibody construction was less rigid than body-on-frame designs. The chassis flexed under hard cornering and acceleration. You could watch the cowl twist during launches. The coil spring front suspension with unequal control arms wasn't optimized for big block weight. The front plowed in tight turns. The multi-leaf rear with solid axle would step out suddenly over bumps mid-corner. Recirculating ball steering was vague and slow, requiring nearly 4 full turns lock to lock with significant center play. Optional front discs with rear drums were adequate for street driving, but marginal under sustained abuse. The nose-heavy weight bias meant front brakes did most work and faded quickly, leaving rear drums that locked easily. 1969 Mercury Cougar Eliminator 428 Cobra Jet. Mercury's luxury pony car got the performance treatment. The 428 Cobra Jet made 335 horsepower officially, but real output was closer to 400 with torque exceeding 440 pound-feet. Quarter miles ran mid-13s with 60 arriving just over 6 seconds. At nearly 3,500 pounds, the Cougar was heavier than the Mustang platform it shared. The 111-inch wheelbase versus the Mustang's 1-on-8 provided straight-line stability but reduced agility. Hideaway headlights added nose weight. Mercury positioned the Cougar as more refined with plusher interior and extra sound deadening. That luxury added weight and dulled responses. The comfort-tuned suspension wallowed through corners. Slow, overboosted steering provided minimal feedback. Brakes faded quickly under hard use. 1968 Plymouth Roadrunner. Plymouth's budget muscle car delivered maximum performance for minimum money. The base 383 cubic inch V8 made 335 horsepower and 425 pound-feet of torque, propelling the 3,500 pound Roadrunner through the quarter mile in the mid-14s. The optional 440 made 375 horsepower and 480 pound-feet, running low 14s and hitting 60 in under 6 seconds. Plymouth stripped everything that didn't add speed. Vinyl seats, rubber floor mats, and the cheapest suspension and brakes available. The front suspension was basic torsion bars with minimal damping. The rear used leaf springs and a solid axle with inadequate shocks. Steering was manual unless you paid extra. Brakes were drums all around in base form. The 4-speed manual had widely spaced gears. First was extremely low for launches, but the jump to second was huge. Rev near redline in first, then drop thousands of RPM shifting to second. If you weren't smooth, the rear end would break loose violently, sending inexperienced drivers spinning. Plymouth sold over 44,000 Roadrunners in 1968 alone. Young buyers could afford them. 1969 Dodge Charger RT Hemi. Dodge's fastback was beautiful, powerful, and lethal. The 426 Hemi V8 made 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet officially, but real output was closer to 500 horses. The Charger Hemi blasted through quarter miles in the low 13s and hit 60 in under 5.5 seconds. Supercar numbers achieved with essentially a race motor. But at over 208 inches long and weighing nearly 3,800 pounds, it had serious momentum. The long hood, over 6 feet from bumper to windshield, compromised forward visibility. The unibody flexed under hard acceleration, doors jammed after hard use. Panel gaps changed. The leaf spring rear with solid axle meant constant wheel hop. The Hemi's power delivery made this worse. Docile below 3,000 RPM, then violent above it. No gentle transition, just an on-off switch. Below 3,000, you had a lazy engine. Above 3,000, you had 500 horsepower trying to tear the rear axle out. Rear tires would break loose violently when the engine came on cam. The recirculating ball steering had lots of play and little feedback. 1967 Chevrolet Corvette L88. The L88 Corvette was barely street legal. Chevrolet built it for racing but had to sell a certain number for homologation, essentially a race car with headlights. The 7.0-liter V8 was officially rated at 430 horsepower, but real output exceeded 560 horses, possibly closer to 600. The L88 could run quarter miles in the low 12s and hit 60 in under 4 seconds. Numbers impressive even today. But everything was compromised for racing. The 12.5-to-1 compression ratio required racing fuel. Run pump gas and the engine would destroy itself. The solid lifter camshaft barely ran below 3,000 RPM. The idle was so rough that parts would vibrate loose. No heater, no radio, no sound deadening. The chassis couldn't handle the power. The independent rear suspension used a single transverse leaf spring that allowed rear wheels to tuck under during hard cornering. That sudden camber change would break the rear loose without warning. Chevrolet only sold 20 L88 Corvettes in 1967. 1969 Pontiac GTO Judge Ram Air 4. Pontiac's wildest GTO combined outrageous styling with genuine performance. The Judge package added bold graphics, a rear wing, and the Ram Air 4 engine, a 400 cubic inch V8 making 370 horsepower officially, but over 400 in reality. Built for top-end power with round port cylinder heads and aggressive camshaft timing, the engine made most power between 4,000 and 6,000 RPM. Below that, it was sluggish. Above it, a monster. The GTO Judge ran quarter miles in the mid-13s and hit 60 in around 6 seconds. But the power delivery made it tricky. You had to keep the engine in its narrow power band. Drop below 4,000 RPM and you'd lose momentum. The chassis was typical GM A-body. Coil springs at all 4 corners allowed significant body roll. Recirculating ball steering with power assist was light but vague. Front discs and rear drums were adequate for normal driving, but marginal during sustained hard use. What made the Judge particularly dangerous was its image. Loud graphics and aggressive stance attracted young buyers who wanted to look fast, but sometimes lacked the skills. 1968 Ford Mustang Cobra, Jet 428. Ford's answer to big block pony car wars redefined what was possible in a compact chassis. The 428 was officially rated at 335 horsepower. Real power was closer to 410 horses with torque exceeding 440 pound-feet. Ford improved everything that mattered. Larger valves improved breathing. Better exhaust manifolds reduced back pressure. Revised camshaft improved the power curve. The Mustang Cobra Jet ran quarter miles in the mid-13s and hit 60 in just over 6 seconds. But stuffing a big block into the compact engine bay created compromises. The engine sat far forward, making weight distribution heavily nose-biased. Over 60% of weight was on the front axle, causing severe understeer. Turn into a corner and the front would plow straight ahead. The front suspension was simple wishbones and coil springs, overwhelmed by the weight. Spring rates were too soft, shock absorbers were undersized. The result was excessive nosedive under braking and significant body roll during cornering. These 10 machines represented the wild, unregulated peak of American automotive performance. They were built in an era when power mattered more than safety, when cubic inches were king, and when survival depended entirely on driver skill. Insurance companies eventually caught up, rating these cars as uninsurable for young drivers. The government stepped in with emissions and safety regulations. The oil crisis made big block engines economically unviable. But for one glorious decade, Detroit built cars that were genuinely dangerous. Machines that could kill you as easily as they could thrill you. Which of these 60s legends would you be brave enough to drive at the limit? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you love stories from the golden age of muscle cars, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into automotive history.